A CEO walks into his own dealership disguised as an unemployed man, and just minutes later, he demands the manager be fired. What happened? Morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long streaks of light across the pavement as if stretching time itself, but the man sitting behind the wheel of the old Subaru seemed unmoved by the scenery passing outside. Maxwell Rowan, the founder of the Rowan Driveline automotive dealership chain, was deep in character as an unemployed, middle-aged customer, and he knew that the moment he stepped into that showroom, every glance would pass over him like he was just another forgettable face. His faded shirt, frayed jeans, and slightly unkempt graying hair were all meticulously prepared, not to hide his identity but to quietly observe the world from the perspective of those often ignored by the system. The sliding glass door opened with its familiar ping, carrying the scent of fresh leather and soft jazz playing in the background, carefully chosen to evoke a sense of trust. The showroom gleamed, spotless and polished, just like every report he'd received from regional directors. Stable sales, strong customer satisfaction, no significant incidents. But Maxwell knew that numbers didn't always tell the full story. People did. He walked slowly past the rows of cars, gently touching the hood of a brand-new sedan as if genuinely considering a purchase, while his eyes quietly scanned the room. And then he heard it. Not a sound exactly, but a subtle shift in the air. A woman's voice, soft and pleading, laced with desperation. "Please, I'm begging you. This car used to belong to our son." Maxwell turned toward the trade-in counter. A couple stood side by side, leaning into each other as if to keep from falling apart. The man, Walter, tried to maintain his composure, but his eyes were red. Mrs. Irene, clutching her husband's hand, trembled as she spoke. In front of them sat a silver hatchback, clearly aged but lovingly cared for. Behind the desk stood Cal Bishop, the branch manager, polished in appearance, wearing a half-smile that barely masked his indifference, speaking with a tone that could not have been colder. "I've already made the offer. 2,000 is the final number. Market value doesn't account for memories, ma'am." The words cut like a blade through time. Maxwell stepped a little closer, still playing the part of a curious bystander. Irene struggled to hold back tears, her voice shaking. "He was a firefighter. This car is the only thing we have left after the accident. We've held on to it for 2 years, but now we can't afford the repairs. Please, is there any better option?" Cal shrugged. "I understand the emotion, but a car is a commodity, not a sacred relic." Maxwell clenched his hand inside his coat pocket. He didn't need to ask the car's name. All it took was one glance at the gear shift where a small engraving read, "For those who serve." His chest tightened. It was a line he had personally carved years ago as part of a vehicle donation program for rural fire stations, a project he had founded 2 decades earlier. That car hadn't just been given in gratitude, it carried part of his legacy. And now it was being appraised like scrap. He turned away from Cal and walked toward the car, gently running his hand across the hood as if touching a memory. The couple didn't recognize him, but Walter nodded politely. "Looking to trade in too?" Maxwell nodded. "Something like that. But I'm interested in this one. If you haven't finalized anything, I'd like to ask directly. Would you be willing to sell it to me for 5,000? Both of them froze. "No, we can't take that much," Irene said quickly. "We're not doing this for the money, we just need something to get to the doctor." Maxwell smiled, his gaze warm. "I don't plan to use it for commuting. I want to restore it, to bring it back to life the way your son once lived for others." The air around them turned still. Cal, realizing he was about to lose the deal, burst out from behind the desk. "Sir, you're not allowed to make direct purchases here. That vehicle is under dealership transaction." Maxwell didn't turn. He looked Irene in the eye, reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. "Some things," he said, "shouldn't appear in anyone's books but those who truly value them." In that moment, he was not just the CEO of a dealership empire. He was living proof that no matter how powerful a system becomes, it can lose its soul without one essential thing: compassion. And he knew that car was only the beginning, the spark to a much larger journey, a journey to confront the shadow of what he had built. The air in the showroom turned noticeably colder as Cal Bishop, still clinging to control, marched toward Maxwell with a tone that was half courteous, half bitter. "Sir, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding of protocol. Once a vehicle is entered into our appraisal system, it can't be sold privately. If you're genuinely interested, I can show you a few other models that may be more suitable." But Maxwell didn't bother to turn around. His gaze remained on the hatchback as if he were listening to the breath of something long forgotten. "I'm not here to test drive a car, Mr. Bishop," he said in a voice low and steady. "I'm here to preserve a piece of courage, something your sales reports will never account for." Walter and Irene exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with doubt, brushing up against the unexpected warmth of this stranger. Irene whispered, almost afraid to break the moment, "You really want to keep this car?" Maxwell nodded, then smiled. "I don't plan on driving it anywhere. I'm going to restore it, every detail the way it was once lovingly maintained by the son you're still grieving." He took a check already written and placed it gently into Walter's hand. 5,000, not for the car, but for the memories. "I can't put a price on your loss, but I can make sure this car doesn't end up collecting dust on a resale lot." Just then, Cal's footsteps echoed across the showroom floor, heavy against the tile. "I'm afraid I can't authorize this transaction. We don't operate on sentiment, sir, as you surely understand." Maxwell turned to him, locking eyes for the first time, his gaze sharp and cold. "I understand procedure better than anyone in this building." Then, slowly and deliberately, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a business card, holding it between two fingers. "Maxwell Rowan, founder of Rowan Driveline, and you, Cal, just rejected compassion in front of the man who built this company." In that instant, the showroom fell into complete silence. Employees pretended to type, but their eyes darted toward the scene. Cal stood frozen, as if struck by an invisible blow. His lips moved, but no words came out. Maxwell didn't let the silence linger. He turned to Walter and Irene, nodding softly. "Don't worry, I'll handle the paperwork. All you have to do is drive the car home today, as a final gift from the son who once made this community proud." Walter gripped his wife's hand. "I don't know what to say." "Just hold on to faith," Maxwell replied. "Because today, we have to believe that kindness still exists." He opened the driver's door, gently brushing his hand over the chipped paint. "This car was once donated to a fire station through the Vehicles for Those Who Serve program. I recognized it from the engraving I placed on the gear shift. And now it returns to the hands of someone who treated it like a part of their own family." While Walter stepped away to retrieve the vehicle documents, Cal began to slowly retreat. Not because he had been fired, but because he knew his time had run out. A manager who survived by metrics, yet forgot that human dignity can't be measured by KPIs. A few employees nodded quietly. One of them was Zoe, the appraisal technician who had once been reassigned for being too soft. Now she found the courage to step forward. "I tried to speak up about how Mr. Cal pressured elderly or less tech-savvy customers into bad deals. No one listened. Thank you for coming back when it mattered most." Maxwell looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small, approving nod. "I didn't come back to judge anyone. I came back to remind us all that when a car becomes a legacy, then those who sell cars must learn to live with legacy too." He turned and walked out of the showroom, leaving behind Cal's shaken stare and the quiet confusion of those who had mistaken him for a nobody. But he knew, by tomorrow, everyone would remember this moment. Not because someone was dismissed, but because an old car had reminded an entire system what it means to honor memory, to uphold value, and to preserve human dignity. That afternoon, as the showroom began to quiet down, Maxwell returned, this time no longer in disguise. The dark coat had been replaced with a perfectly tailored gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his gaze calm yet unmistakably commanding. There was no need to introduce himself anymore. The truth had already surfaced that morning, and the name Maxwell Rowan had spread across the dealership like a slow-burning fire, ready to consume the layers of pretense Cal Bishop had built over the years. As the glass doors slid open, every eye in the room turned toward him. Some employees hurried to adjust their shirts, a few hastily locked their phones, while Cal remained frozen at the front desk, trying to hold on to a facade of calm, though his clenched fists beneath the counter told a different story. Maxwell said nothing at first. He walked directly to the center of the showroom, unbuttoned his jacket, turned his back to Cal, and quietly pulled his phone from his inner pocket. One tap, and the warm baritone of his voice echoed through the intercom. "All showroom staff, please report to the main floor within 5 minutes. This is an emergency meeting. No absences will be excused." A brief silence followed. Then, like a ripple across still water, employees emerged one by one from desks and back rooms, gradually forming a semicircle around Maxwell without being told to do so, standing before him like a jury before its witness. Maxwell scanned each face, his expression not harsh but searching, as if seeking something deeper in the silence. "I didn't come here to clean house," he began, his voice not loud, but so clear the room seemed to hold its breath. "I came here to ask one simple question, and I hope you'll answer honestly." He looked around. "How many of you have seen customers leave this showroom feeling like they were misled?" No one responded, but several eyes dropped to the floor, some brows furrowed, fingers clenched slightly. Maxwell didn't wait for a reply. He nodded, as if that was answer enough. "And how many of you have ever been trained to undervalue trade-ins or push high-interest loans on people who didn't know to ask questions?" Again, silence, until a voice broke through, uncertain but firm. "I have..." It was Chris, a young new hire, face still fresh but eyes bright with clarity. "Cal trained me to pressure customers into upgrading to new models even when they didn't need to, especially the elderly." Chris took a breath, continuing without looking at Cal. "We were told not to ask about their budget, just get the signature." Cal stepped forward, but Maxwell held up a hand. "Go on." Chris hesitated, then nodded. "When customers didn't understand, we were encouraged to use complicated finance terms to confuse them, then close the deal fast." An older woman among the staff added, "Not everyone did it, but anyone who refused got their shifts cut or schedule changed last minute. We were too afraid to speak up." Maxwell turned to Cal, his stare sharp as a blade. "Do you have anything to say?" Cal blinked, pressed his lips together, then responded with forced composure. "I did what was necessary to keep our numbers up. We're a business, not a charity." Maxwell gave a faint, bitter smile. "Wrong. We are a business, yes, but I didn't hand over the keys to this brand so someone could trade away its ethics for quarterly gains." He took a step forward, narrowing the distance between them to just inches. "You didn't just betray customer trust. You manipulated your own team into building a culture of fear in place of service." Cal opened his mouth to speak, but all he could manage was, "You can't blame this all on me." "I won't," Maxwell replied. "I will take responsibility for not looking closer, sooner, but I will begin fixing it by removing the rot that's been hollowing out this system." He turned to face the full team. "Cal Bishop, you are hereby suspended effective immediately. All access credentials will be locked. You have 10 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the premises. A formal HR meeting will take place tomorrow morning." The room went still. No applause, no smug looks, just silence, not out of fear, but something deeper. They had just witnessed a real leader take action, not for appearance, but for the truth. And that truth had just been restored to this place. A showroom that, for the first time in a long time, felt like a space where people were meant to serve people. The next day, the showroom felt like a different place. Not because the motivational posters had been replaced or the ceiling lights had been polished to shine brighter, but because something invisible had settled in: attention. Employees arrived more punctually than usual. They no longer stared at their phones during work hours, and most notably, no one whispered behind a customer's back. But Maxwell knew well that no matter how powerful a declaration may sound, it cannot reshape a rotten culture unless it reaches the roots. So instead of retreating to the executive office as he once did, he stayed in a small meeting room tucked behind the warehouse, a space that, under Cal's tenure, few ever entered unless required. Maxwell called in teams of employees, group by group, for private conversations. Not to interrogate, not to set traps, just to listen. What struck him most was not how many people had been forced to stay quiet to stay safe, but how they spoke about it with hesitation, almost shame, as if they were the ones at fault. A technician named Omar admitted he had flagged multiple vehicles with minor accident histories that were later forced to be listed as excellent condition. A woman named Elena described how she had once caught Cal altering appraisal numbers when customers weren't present. When she spoke up, her schedule was shifted to late-night shifts, week after week. One employee even provided evidence that Cal had received personal kickbacks from certain finance partners for pushing high-interest deals. These words, had they been spoken in one of Cal's sales meetings, would have been dismissed as complaints. But today, they were recorded as testimony. Then Zoe, who had spoken up the day before, entered. She sat down without needing to be asked. "I used to think I was weak," she began, eyes fixed on the table. "When I couldn't speak up, when I saw older customers being misled and said nothing. I told myself someday someone else would stand up for me, but no one came, until yesterday." Maxwell remained silent, letting her lead the conversation. "I didn't think I'd still be here. But if you really want to change this place, I'm willing to start over, from scratch, with you." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. No one should feel like staying silent is the only way to keep their job. And you don't need anyone else to stand up for you anymore. Because starting today, we're going to build a workplace where people are truly heard. That afternoon, Maxwell stepped up to the small platform in the center of the main showroom floor, a space once reserved for sales events. But today, there were no banners, no promo flyers, only a single whiteboard with 4 simple words: rebuild from the ground. He addressed the entire staff. "We're not firing anyone else, we're retraining. Not to turn people into sales robots, but to remind us who we are. From now on, every deal will be reviewed by an independent oversight team. Every customer complaint will come directly to me, and if any of you feel pressure because of that, you are free to leave, right now. No one will stop you." Silence filled the room. No one moved. Then a single round of applause broke the stillness, scattered at first, then growing, steady and unshakable. Maxwell didn't bow or thank them. He simply stood still, eyes fixed on the last row, where Chris and Zoe stood side by side. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running a dealership chain. He felt like he was part of a team, a family, not perfect, but learning how to be honest with one another. As the day drew to a close, Maxwell received a short message from Central Customer Service. "We just heard from a customer who was previously denied due to a misjudged credit file. They heard you're at this branch and want to give it another shot." Maxwell typed a reply, just 4 words. "Let's start again today." 3 days after Cal Bishop walked out of the showroom, news stories began circulating across automotive forums, social media groups, and consumer finance blogs. Rowan Driveline, genuine reform or emotional theater? A clip taken from the showroom's security camera, showing Maxwell handing a check to the elderly couple, was uploaded with a sarcastic caption, "Saving the world with cash and tears?" And behind the smear campaign, Maxwell didn't need to look far to find the name leading the charge: Owen Blair. Owen wasn't just a competitor. He had once been the former vice president of strategy at Rowan Driveline, a close confidant to Maxwell during the early days of building the company. But 5 years earlier, an internal audit uncovered that Owen had manipulated market reports to attract phantom investor capital. Maxwell had chosen then to quietly let him go, without public scandal, without lawsuits. But now, that shadow had returned, and this time, it wasn't targeting numbers. It was going after reputation. Owen's dealership chain, Blair Motors, immediately launched a series of counter-ads. Billboards outside his showrooms read, "No drama, just real deals." Promotional campaigns flooded the market, offering cash bonuses to anyone who brought in a Rowan Driveline quote for comparison. More dangerously, Owen hosted live streams, publicly calling out Maxwell as a man selling fairy tales to rational markets. Maxwell wasn't angry, but he understood that unless he acted swiftly, the trust he had just begun to rebuild could be buried under waves of cynicism. He called an emergency meeting with his executive team at headquarters. There were no slides, no presentations, just him, a whiteboard, and a marker. "Owen wants the world to believe that kindness has no place in business," he said. "I intend to prove the opposite, but I won't do it through declarations. I need proof, and that proof lies with those who were once deceived by Blair Motors." The plan was laid out that very night. A campaign called Reopen the Records was launched. Every customer complaint ever filed, across every Rowan dealership, even ones Maxwell had never personally visited, was reviewed and followed up. Transactions flagged for hidden fees, irregular interest rates, or misleading terms were re-examined. Most importantly, Maxwell created a direct hotline for former Blair Motors customers. The first message came in at 2:14 a.m. Bought an SUV from Blair last year, forced to buy a ridiculous insurance package. They said no loan approval without it. The second was told my interest rate was 4%, found out it was 6.7% after they added document fees. The third, the fourth, then hundreds. Maxwell did something unprecedented. He personally called each customer back, apologized, verified documents, and when appropriate, issued refunds with his own signature. Local news stations picked up the story. National finance networks followed. A primetime interview aired featuring customers defrauded by competing dealerships. And then, the unexpected happened. A former Blair Motors employee named Hannah appeared on television, publicly revealing documents proving Blair's system had used loan simulation software to trick customers into thinking their interest rates were lower than reality. Owen Blair lost control. In a late-night live stream, he declared, "I will sue Maxwell Rowan for unfair competition." But no one was listening anymore, because the very next day, the Federal Consumer Protection Commission launched an official investigation into Blair Motors. Every branch was reviewed. Within 1 week, Blair Holdings' stock plummeted. Meanwhile, Rowan Driveline saw its customer base triple. Appointment bookings surged to the point where the internal system had to deploy additional servers to prevent overload. Maxwell sat alone in his office, staring out at the lot where rows of cars shimmered in the golden afternoon sun. He didn't feel triumphant. No victory feels clean when it begins with betrayal. But he knew he had done the right thing, not just protecting his company, but proving one essential truth. Ethics don't weaken a business. They strengthen its heart. 1 month after Blair Motors shut down its final branch, Maxwell Rowan received a handwritten letter from an unfamiliar address. The envelope was ivory-colored, the paper slightly creased, and the handwriting shaky but deliberate. Inside was a photo, a silver hatchback, fully restored, parked in front of an old brick porch with the elderly couple he could never forget, Walter and Irene Dorsey, standing beside it. Below the photo was a line written in blue ink. "The car is home, and so are we. Thank you for believing we were worth a second chance. Our son would be proud." Maxwell sat still for a long time after reading it. Not out of surprise, but because of a deep feeling he couldn't quite name. A stillness from within, as though the noise of business, media, and competition had finally faded into silence. That car, once a vessel for a fallen son's memory, had become something more, a symbol of what Maxwell had always believed, that compassion never loses its value, it only needs to be returned to the right place at the right time. That day, Maxwell walked down to the customer lounge unannounced. The staff on duty hurried to their feet, but he waved them off. He wasn't there to inspect, he was there to listen. He asked a single question. "If each of you could change one thing about how we serve our customers, what would it be?" A technician suggested more training in emotional communication. A young salesperson said customers should have easier access to transparent pricing. Someone else proposed priority service hours for seniors. Maxwell wrote down every suggestion, then nodded. "Good, we'll do them all." That afternoon, he hosted a small press gathering right inside the showroom, not at headquarters or a luxury hotel. The media expected a system expansion announcement. Instead, Maxwell unveiled a completely new initiative, the Rowan Ethics Lab, an independent business ethics unit separate from the sales and legal departments. This team would be led by employees who had once been victims or witnesses of internal manipulation. Any customer or staff member at any level could file a report directly, anonymously if needed. "I used to think ethics came from trust," Maxwell said. "But over the years, I've learned that ethics must be protected by structure. And if we can't build a system that's fair to our own people and our customers, then every car we sell, no matter how beautiful, is meaningless." 3 months later, customer return rates hit a historic high. Social media overflowed with stories of unexpectedly kind experiences at Rowan dealerships. One customer wrote, "3 days after I bought my car, a staff member called to ask if I had noticed any unclear charges. No brand has ever done that." Another said, "They refunded me $200 because I was accidentally charged a registration fee. I hadn't even noticed." These stories weren't born from a marketing campaign. They came from the alignment between principle and practice. Maxwell made no further media statements. He quietly stepped down from external advisory boards, keeping only his roles in ethics oversight and system guidance. When asked why he declined the widely anticipated expansion into Asian markets, he simply replied, "We shouldn't grow faster than our own trust." One weekend, he returned to the branch where it all began. The glass doors still chimed the familiar ping, but something inside felt different. Hanging in the waiting room was a framed photo of the silver hatchback. Beneath it the words, "You can't price a memory." Maxwell stood quietly, looking. A young staff member approached and asked gently, "Can I help you find a vehicle today, sir?" He turned with a soft smile. "No, thank you. I'm just here to see that the right things are still being preserved." Then he stepped back outside, into the soft glow of the afternoon sun. The showroom behind him was no longer just a store. It was a promise made real. And Maxwell knew he hadn't left behind a legacy. He had simply passed on something worth trusting, at the right time, to those who knew how to keep it. In my role as an advisor to many businesses, I've witnessed countless reform efforts that began with reports, data, or new tools. But lasting change always starts with one person brave enough to say no to what's wrong and yes to what's right. Maxwell didn't need media coverage. He didn't need a PR campaign. All he needed was one car, one timely action, and one uncompromising decision. If you believe that real leadership begins with listening and acting with integrity, then like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story, and don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Choose what's right," because every big change begins with one small choice.